Shalom and welcome to Network Live Jewish Ministries, where we teach the Bible from a Jewish historical, cultural, and linguistic perspective. This teaching is on Daniel 8. It is part 1, and the title of this teaching is The Coming Kingdom in Elam. As we start today, I just want to begin with a couple of questions. Have you ever received a dream or vision from God? How does God use dreams and visions to communicate to his people? So we will be thinking about these questions as we study this chapter. In this teaching, we will begin to study Daniel chapter 8, and we will seek to understand what God was communicating to Daniel in this particular vision recorded for us in Daniel chapter 8. So let's begin in verses 1 and 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar the king, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously. I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam, and I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Ulai Canal. So first of all, we want to understand the context. What is the context of Daniel chapter 8? As we begin Daniel chapter 8, it is important to note that the original language has changed from Aramaic, which was the previous chapters, back to the Hebrew language starting in verse 1 of Daniel 8. We are not told why Daniel reverted back to the Hebrew language. However, scholars and commentators give various reasons for the change in languages. They mostly spiritualize it and want to try to understand why Daniel did this. So the question is, why did Daniel switch from Aramaic in chapter 7 to Hebrew in chapter 8? I prefer the most obvious reason. Hebrew was Daniel's mother tongue. It was the language of the Jewish people since the beginning. So Hebrew would be the natural language that he would write in. Daniel began his written account in the 1st chapter of the book of Daniel using the Hebrew language, and then he switched to Aramaic in chapter 2 because it was the language of the kingdom of Babylon. As we read here in Daniel 2:4, then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever, tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. Literally in this one verse in Daniel 2:4, we see the original language change from Hebrew to Aramaic. Every word immediately preceding the word Aramaic was Hebrew, and then every word after is the Aramaic language. Daniel recorded the quoted speech of the Chaldeans and continued to use Aramaic from Daniel 2:4b, which is the second half of verse 4, until the end of Daniel 7. Now in Daniel 8, Daniel reverts to Hebrew. Daniel recorded official matters and events that occurred in the kingdom in Aramaic, and that mostly concerned the first 6 chapters of the book. Chapter 7 was a prophetic dream that Daniel recorded in Aramaic. For whatever reason, Daniel then chose to change back to Hebrew for the final 5 chapters of the book that bears his name. Now, 2 obvious reasons for recording these chapters in Hebrew, chapters 8 to 12, was to write them in the biblical language and in the heart language of his people. When we read in the beginning of this chapter that it was the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar the king, it tells us that it was approximately the year 551 BCE. Daniel also informs us of the following. A vision appeared to me, Daniel, subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously. So here Daniel simply tells us that a vision appeared to him. The dream and visions that Daniel recorded in chapter 7 were something that he saw at night while he was on his bed. The vision in Daniel 8 is not recorded as a dream at night. This vision could have appeared to Daniel at any time during the day, but we are never given any further details regarding the time, so we just don't know when it was. Another good question to ask regarding the context is, where was Daniel when he actually saw this vision? Daniel described the location in his vision in the following manner. Quote, I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam. So the question is, was Daniel actually in the citadel of Susa physically in Elam, or did he only see himself there in the vision? We don't know for certain, but it seems from the text that he only saw himself there in the vision, in a similar manner to how Ezekiel was transported to Jerusalem in the vision which he saw, which is recorded in Ezekiel chapter 8. Now, Daniel obviously recognized the location as he specified the name of the province as Elam, the name of the city as Susa, and the exact location next to the stream or the canal as Ulai. Why was Daniel transported to this particular location in the vision? We're going to actually answer this question at the end of this teaching, so we will get back to this, but it's important to think about the location and why he was located there. Let's continue in verses 3 and 4. Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had 2 horns was standing in front of the canal. Now, the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last. I saw the ram butting westward, northward, and southward, and no other beast could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power. But he did as he pleased and magnified himself. Daniel saw a 2-horned ram standing in front of the canal of water. Now, first of all, it's important to understand what a ram is. A ram is a male sheep. And then we are given several details about this specific ram. He had 2 horns, but one horn was longer than the other, and the longer horn came up last or afterward. The ram is described as butting or goring toward the west, north, and south, kind of an aggressive manner. This ram was victorious over all other beasts with no opponents. The ram did as he pleased and became great. So who or what does this 2-horned ram represent? We'll answer that in a minute. Let's continue in verse 5. Daniel says, while I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. The vision that Daniel saw moved quickly. As Daniel was trying to understand the meaning of the ram with the 2 horns, he then saw a male goat with the 1 horn coming from the west. The male goat appeared to be flying over the earth, as the text explicitly states that the goat did not touch the earth. The male goat was also described as having a conspicuous horn between his eyes. Now, goats generally have 2 horns. The goat in Daniel's vision only had 1 horn. The phrase describing the horn of the male goat in Hebrew is Karen Chazut Bein Einav. And this phrase is well translated, a conspicuous horn between his eyes. It is worth pointing out that the main adjective describing the single horn of the goat is chazut, which comes from the root word chazeh, which means to see and can also mean vision. So the word chazon is actually vision in Hebrew as well. In this context, it is translated into English as conspicuous, meaning something that is clearly seen. Goats generally have 2 horns, but this goat had only 1 conspicuous horn, at least at the beginning. We'll see that some other horns come up later. We also read in verse 8 that this same horn is described as Hakaren Hagadolah, the great horn or the large horn. So this understanding of conspicuous is something that was obvious, something you saw. And then we continue in verses 6 to 8, and it's describing the action of the male goat with the 1 horn. And it says, he came up to the ram that had the 2 horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and I rushed at him in his mighty wrath. I saw him come beside the ram, and I was enraged, and he was enraged at him. And he struck the ram and shattered his 2 horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him. So he hurled him to the ground and trampled on him, and there was none to rescue the ram from his power. Then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly. But as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and in its place there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. So in verses 6 to 7, the one-horned male goat is described as charging the 2-horned ram in great wrath. The goat struck the ram and shattered the ram's 2 horns. The male goat was victorious while the ram was left without anyone to help him. The male goat is said to become very great, but then we read how his great horn is shattered or broken at the height of his might. In place of the single great horn, it is written, there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. The same Hebrew word chazut, conspicuous, is used to describe these 4 horns as they extend to the 4 winds of the heavens. The 4 winds of heaven are used in the sense of the 4 directions on the earth, north, south, east, and west. So how are we to understand these 2 different animals, the ram and the goat, with their various horns? Well, thankfully, we don't have to work too hard to try to interpret this or understand it, because this meaning of the ram and goat with their horns is actually interpreted by an angel in the second half of this chapter. Now, although the vision continues in Daniel chapter 8, we're going to take a pause here and stop and try to bring clarity to this vision up until this point. So the angel Gabriel was commanded to interpret this vision for Daniel, and he explained the meaning of the 2 animals, the goat and the ram, in the following manner. Beginning in verse 20, Gabriel said to Daniel, the ram which you saw with the 2 horns represents the kings of Media and Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. So very clear, right? The ram with the 2 horns represents the kings of Media Persia. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece. The large horn of the goat is the first king of Greece. Very clearly spelled out. And then we continue to read in verse 22 in the interpretation, right? Gabriel says, the broken horn and the 4 horns that arose in its place represent 4 kingdoms which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. So the 4 horns that arise in place of the single horn represent 4 kingdoms which come from his nation, which is Greece, but not by his power. There is no dispute regarding the nations of these 2 kingdoms of the 2 different animals, Media, Persia, and Greece. These 2 kingdoms fit into the structure of the 4 kingdoms given in Daniel chapters 2 and 7, which we see more clearly in the following graph. And I just want to kind of put these in perspective, right? Because we have the dream of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 2 of the image, and we have the beast of Daniel 7, and then we have the 2 animals here, the ram and the goat of Daniel chapter 8. Now, we know that these are all representative of the kingdoms, right? So we have the kingdoms here next to the image, Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, and then the final empire that comes out of that 4th kingdom. So we know how the lion represents Babylon, the bear represents Media Persia, the leopard represents Greece, and the beast of Daniel 7 represents the 4th kingdom, which we know from history now is Rome. And now we have in Daniel 8, to the right of your screen, the ram, who is symbolic of the 2nd kingdom, Media Persia, very clearly stated. So he's equal to the bear, or parallel, we could say. And the goat is parallel to the leopard of Daniel 7. That is the country of Greece. And so these are all different symbolic ways that God illustrated how these kingdoms would arise and have their part in the fulfillment of the Gentiles. So the 2 horns of the ram clearly represent the dual kingdoms of the Medes and Persians. The second horn, which came up later of the ram, is a clear reference to the Persian kingdom, which came up after the Median kingdom, but became greater as the Medes were absorbed into the Persian Empire. Media Persia is clearly counted as one kingdom of the 4 kingdoms described in the prophecies of the book of Daniel. I only say this because there are some who want to teach that Media and Persia were 2 separate kingdoms as far as understanding the 4 kingdoms of Daniel 2 and 7. But clearly, through history and even through Daniel 8, it's very clear it's counted as one kingdom together, right? So Media Persia conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, taking center stage as the 2nd kingdom. We've looked at this in the past teachings as well. The goat represents the kingdom of Greece, the third kingdom. The conspicuous horn, the single great horn of the goat, represents the first king of Greece. Now, first in preeminence and greatness, not necessarily in time. It's similar to how Nebuchadnezzar was considered the king of Babylon, right? He wasn't the first king of Babylon. His father was before him the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But Nebuchadnezzar was the main king who gained the notoriety for all that he did. So the first dominant king of Greece is clearly referring to Alexander the Great. It was Alexander the Great who led his military to conquer the Persian kingdom. And I'm going to quote Dr. Walford here, who does a good job explaining how Alexander the Great conquered Persia in a very short time. And he says this, quote, the forces of Alexander first met and defeated the Persians at the Granicus River in Asia Minor in May 334 BC, which was the beginning of the complete conquest of the entire Persian Empire. A year and a half later, a battle occurred at Issus in November 333 BC near the northeastern tip of the Mediterranean Sea. The power of Persia was finally broken at Gaugamela near Nineveh in October 331 BC. In just 3 years' time, Alexander the Great was able to conquer the Persian Empire. The Greek forces came from the west, as you see to the left of your screen in Macedonia, and continually moved east, conquering vast territory under Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great conquered territory from Macedonia to India in just over 10 years, from 334 to 323 BCE. The goat with the great horn in Daniel 8, 5-8 is described as moving quickly across the earth and appeared to not touch the earth. This image fits Alexander the Great precisely as he moved at intense speed to conquer and trample down the Persian Empire in just 3 years, and then continued. Then at the height of his power, he was quickly broken and died. The death of Alexander was mysterious. However, he was known to be an alcoholic. After several days of a high fever, Alexander the Great died in Babylon in the year 323 BCE at the young age of 32. So after the death of Alexander, we see the fulfillment in history of what we read in Daniel 8:22. Quote, the four horns that arose in its place represent four kingdoms, which will arise from his nation, although not with his power. Since Alexander died without an heir, four others would eventually divide up his kingdom, although not with his power. There were four Greek generals of Alexander the Great who became four kings, ruling the following territories. And we've actually discussed this before. I've taught on this before in previous teachings, but just to review these four generals who ruled over these four different areas, their names are highlighted in blue, right? So Ptolemy was given Egypt and parts of Asia Minor. Cassander was given the territory of Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus was given Thrace and parts of Asia Minor, Western Bithynia, Phrygia, Mysia, and Lydia. Seleucus was given the remainder of Alexander's empire, which included Syria, Israel, and Mesopotamia. The correlation of the dreams and visions of chapters 2, 7, and 8 of the book of Daniel are clearly fulfilled in the kingdoms of Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece. These are clearly spelled out, right? We also see how the specific details of the second and third kingdoms line up in chapters 7 and 8. So again, the second beast, the bear of Daniel 7, with one side higher than the other, correlates to the ram of Daniel 8 with the two horns, one longer than the other, right? Clearly being Media Persia. So Persia is represented as the higher side of the bear and the longer horn of the ram, right? The one that comes up after, but it ends up being the dominant kingdom. The leopard, the third beast of Daniel 7, with its 4 heads and 4 wings, correlates to the goat with its large horn, followed by the 4 horns, right? The kings of Greece. There is more to this vision in Daniel chapter 8, which we will cover in the next teaching. However, I want to conclude this teaching by answering the following questions. the questions regarding the dream. Why did God reveal this vision to the prophet Daniel at the location of Susa in Elam? What was the significance of this particular location? We first see the name Elam in the Bible in Genesis 10, verse 22, where Elam is a name given to one of the sons of Shem, the son of Noah. As we read here, the sons of Shem were Elam and Ashur and Arpachshad and Lud and Aram. So Elam is also the name of the region east of the Tigris River and bordering the northeast region of the Persian Gulf. It could very well be the area that Shem's son settled, right? So Elam was located to the east of Babylon, as we see here in this picture. Now this picture is actually showing kingdoms in the year 1200 BC, right? Because Elam actually has a long history. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but we see how Elam is east of Babylonia at that time. Now, the name Elam is said to be Sumerian, meaning highland. It may also have the meaning of eternity, coming from the word Elam. Specifically, Daniel found himself in the citadel of Susa. Now, Susa is ancient Shushan, a leading city of Elam, which later became part of the Persian Empire. As we read here from Dr. Showers, he's describing Susa. He says Susa was located approximately 230 miles east of Babylon and 120 miles north of the Persian Gulf. After Media Persia became established as a great power, Susa was made the chief capital of the kingdom. The city was situated between the Caiaphas and Copratus rivers. They're tough names. The vision of Daniel chapter 8 occurred in 551 BCE. Understanding the history of Susa and Elam will help to better understand the historical context of Daniel 8. So reading this quote here from a historical document, Susa is one of the oldest cities in the world. Excavations have established that people were living at the Acropolis in 5000 BCE and have shown the existence of urban structures about 4000 BC, right? So it's a very ancient settlement, again, connecting back to the sons of Noah. Susa remained an independent city in the province of Elam for most of its early history. However, it became part of a few different kingdoms along the way, including the Akkadian kingdom, as we read here. Quote, the Elamites, right, the people of Elam, were great builders and artisans and could flourish easily, but they had strong rivals. Approximately 2350 to 2330 BC, Susa fell to a warrior and king, Sargon of Akkad, and the city became part of the Akkad Empire. Susa eventually gained independence in around 2100 BCE and was able, for the most part, to remain a united Elam province over the course of the next 1,500 years. It was then, during the decline of the Assyrian Empire, that Susa will be destroyed by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal between 645 and 640 BCE. Now, this account is documented by King Ashurbanipal's own words. I want to read his account of his destruction of the city of Susa. Again, it's in the year about just completing the destruction in 640 BCE. He says, King Ashurbanipal, he says, Susa, the great holy city, abode of their gods, seat of their mysteries, I conquered. I entered its palaces. I opened their treasuries, where silver and gold, goods and wealth were amassed. I destroyed the ziggurat of Susa. I smashed its shining copper horns. I reduced the temples of Elam to naught. Their gods and goddesses I scattered to the winds. The tombs of their ancient and recent kings I devastated. I exposed to the sun, and I carried away their bones toward the land of Ashur. I devastated the provinces of Elam, and on their lands I sowed salt. unquote. The destruction of Susa in the province of Elam at that time was approximately 90 years before the vision of Daniel, right, in 551 BCE. After this great destruction, Elam appears to have continued as a collection of several smaller kingdoms, and Susa was eventually rebuilt. It was not until the glorious days of Cyrus, King Cyrus the Great, who reigned from 559 to 530 BCE, that Susa and the province of Elam became part of the Medo-Persian kingdom after the conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE. It would take another 20 years from 539 BC before Darius the Great, a Persian king who reigned from 522 to 486, would build a magnificent palace in Susa. So it is 50 years after the time of Cyrus that we read about the importance and grandeur of the city of Susa as the capital city of the Persian kingdom in the book of Esther. Now, most of us are familiar with the book of Esther. I just want to read these verses to again help to understand how Susa eventually became a prominent city, right? So in Esther chapter 1, beginning in verse 1, which says, "Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia, over 127 provinces. In those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of his provinces, being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. When these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were hangings of fine white and violet linen, held by cords of fine purple linen, on silver rings and marble columns, and couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plenteous according to the king's bounty." This is King Ahasuerus, also called Xerxes, and he reigned from 486 to 465 BCE, approximately 80 years after the events of Daniel chapter 8. And that's where we really see the glory of Susa in Elam as the capital. Returning to the vision of Daniel chapter 8, Daniel stated, right, going back to 551 BCE, "I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa." So the word citadel here, I just want to explain that. In Hebrew, we say birah, and it means fortress, castle, or palace. It's used in those words, in those ways. It's also used to explain the temple in Jerusalem at one point. Now, it's important to understand this word is not original Hebrew. It's a foreign word, most likely Akkadian. We see how this same word is used in other scriptures, particularly in the book of Esther, as we've just read, explaining the kingdom of King Ahasuerus and how he sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa. So in the book of Esther, we see how the word citadel or palace was used synonymously as the capital, the leading city of the kingdom. It was there in the province of Elam, in the fortress of Susa, that Daniel found himself in this vision as he was standing by the Ulai Canal, a man-made waterway connecting 2 rivers. In 551 BCE, Elam was not a major province of importance, and the city of Susa was not a leading city as it was in the days of King Ahasuerus. Susa would not become part of the Medo-Persian Empire until at least a decade after the vision that Daniel saw. So the question again, why did God reveal this vision to the prophet Daniel at the location of Susa in Elam? What was the significance of this location at that time? We see how the Persians are to the east, Babylon is to the west. The prophet Daniel was more than likely trying to understand the reason why God brought him to that specific location for that vision, or in that vision. Susa was a prominent city from 100 years earlier, but it was not of importance in 551 BCE, the year of Daniel's vision. Daniel certainly knew the history of Susa and Elam, but why did God reveal this vision to Daniel there regarding the coming kingdoms? God was setting the prophetic scene for Daniel to understand where the next major kingdom would establish its capital, in Susa of Elam. There was no relatable connection of Susa of Elam to the next major kingdom, Media Persia, when Daniel received this vision. God was in the details, including the location of his vision. Although Susa of Elam was insignificant in 551 BCE, God was setting the prophetic scene. Susa of Elam was destined to be the seat of the Media Persian kingdom. It was destined to be the capital. And we see it here in the center of the screen, the little red dot. The black arrow is pointing to the city of Susa. That's in the middle of this vast empire, the Media Persian Empire. God uses the details in dreams and visions to communicate what he is saying and what will be. We need to pay attention to the details in the dreams and visions of the Bible and in the dreams and visions that God gives us today. This is the conclusion to Daniel chapter 8, part 1, the coming kingdom in Elam. We're going to continue in Daniel chapter 8 in the next teaching, so please read it again and pay special attention to the details that are recorded for us in Daniel chapter 8. Again, this is just a list of the resources I use in preparing the teaching. And I want to thank you for being part of this teaching series. And if you are able to support us, we would greatly appreciate it, because you would encourage us and enable us to continue to teach God's word from the Jewish historical, cultural, and linguistic perspective. Thank you so much, and see you again next time.